Orchestrated original memoir story with fresh character names and American cultural details. Orchestrated original memoir story with fresh character names and American cultural details. The first time my mother-in-law introduced me to someone, she said, "This is Garrett's wife." And then she turned to the woman beside her and added, "She does something with cakes." 12 years later, standing in the foyer of her house on Thanksgiving with a casserole dish going cold in my hands, I finally understood that she had never once said my name out loud to a stranger. Not once. I want to be fair to her, even now. Lorraine wasn't cruel in the way you see in movies, with the slammed doors and the screaming. She was worse than that, in a way. She was polite. She had a kind of frost that came dressed as good manners, and for years I kept mistaking the politeness for warmth that just hadn't arrived yet. The way you keep checking the oven, thinking the bread will rise if you just give it 5 more minutes. Let me back up. I met Garrett when I was 26, behind the counter of a coffee shop in a strip mall outside Columbus, Ohio, where I was working mornings and renting a basement apartment that smelled like other people's laundry. He came in for a black coffee, no sugar, and he was the only customer all week who looked me in the eye when he said thank you. We got married 18 months later in a barn that we paid for ourselves, and his mother wore black to the wedding. She said it was slimming. His sister-in-law, Whitney, laughed at that like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. The thing you need to understand about Garrett's family is that there was a golden child, and it wasn't Garrett. Spencer was the older brother, the one who went to Notre Dame, the one who became a regional sales director for a medical device company and bought a house with a 3-car garage in a suburb where the lawns all look like they're under contract to behave. Spencer could do no wrong. When Spencer was 40 minutes late to Christmas dinner, Lorraine kept the food warm and called it his work ethic. When Garrett was 10 minutes late, she'd say, "We were starting to worry you forgot us." Garrett took it the way a lot of second sons take it, which is to say he stopped expecting anything and called that peace. I loved him for a lot of reasons, but I think I loved him most for the way he never tried to compete for his mother's affection. He just quietly built a life off to the side where she couldn't reach it. We bought a little house. We had a daughter, Junie, who came out screaming and never really stopped in the best way, and I built my business. That part matters, so let me tell it right. The Something with Cakes started in our kitchen with a stand mixer my grandmother left me and a Facebook post offering custom birthday cakes for $40. By the time Junie was 3, I had a commercial lease. By the time she was 6, I had 2 locations, a wholesale contract with a regional grocery chain, and 11 employees. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because for years, every single time the family gathered, Lorraine would find a way to ask me in front of everyone, "And how's your little baking thing going, honey? Still keeping you busy?" Still keeping you busy, like I was knitting potholders to fill the hours. I never corrected her. That was my mistake, and I'll own it. I let her think I was a hobbyist with flour on my apron, because correcting her felt like begging, and I was too proud to beg. Garrett knew the real numbers. My accountant knew, but the family had a story about me, and the story was easier than the truth, and people will always reach for the easier story. For a long time I told myself none of it mattered. We had our own life. We had Junie. We didn't need Lorraine's approval to be happy. And that was true, mostly, but there's a particular kind of loneliness in being misunderstood by people who are supposed to be your family, and it wears on you in ways you don't notice until something cracks it open. The thing that cracked it open was the lake house. Lorraine had a place on a small lake about 2 hours north, a cedar-sided cottage that Garrett's late father had bought back in the 70s for almost nothing. It wasn't fancy. It had a screened porch and a dock that needed work, and a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. But it was the one place in the whole family where I'd ever felt something close to belonging, because the lake didn't care who your mother loved best. Junie learned to swim off that dock. Garrett taught her, holding her under the belly while she kicked, and I sat on the warm boards with my coffee and thought, okay, this is the part that's good. What I didn't know. What nobody knew except Garrett and me and our accountant, was that the lake house had almost been lost 3 years earlier. Here's what happened. Garrett's father had passed when Garrett was in his 20s, and he'd left some debt and not much else. Lorraine had a small pension and social security and a paid-off house in town, but she'd taken out a home equity line on the lake house years back to help Spencer get started, which in practice meant she'd handed Spencer the money for the down payment on the 3-car garage house and then quietly carried the loan herself. Spencer never paid it back. He bought a boat instead, a real one with a name painted on the side. When the balloon payment came due, Lorraine couldn't cover it. She was 3 months from the bank taking the lake house, and she didn't call Spencer her golden boy, the one who supposedly had the work ethic. She didn't call him because some part of her knew he'd say no, and she couldn't survive hearing it. So she called Garrett, crying, at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. And Garrett came to me. I remember the conversation exactly. We were standing in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd built everything I had, and he had his phone in his hand, and this look on his face like a kid who'd been asked to fix something he didn't break. "It's almost 40 grand, he said. "I know it's a lot. I know what she's like. I'll understand if you say no." I didn't even have to think about it. The money came from my business account because the truth was, by then, the business was where almost all of our money came from. Garrett worked as a project manager for a construction outfit and did fine. But the cushion, the real cushion, that was the cakes. The little baking thing. I wired the bank the payoff the next morning, and because my accountant is the kind of woman who doesn't let sentiment near a balance sheet, we did it the right way. The loan was satisfied, and we had it papered so that the $40,000 was a documented loan from us to Lorraine, secured against the lake house, with a lien recorded at the county. I want to be clear that we never planned to collect on it. That lien was insurance, not a weapon. My accountant insisted, and I trusted her, and we filed it and forgot about it. Lorraine knew. She thanked us in her way, which is to say she sent a card that said, "Thank you for the help, dear," in handwriting that didn't get around to mentioning the amount. And then, the way she did with anything inconvenient to her version of the world, she folded the whole thing up and put it somewhere she didn't have to look at it. She told everyone she'd handled it. She let Spencer believe she'd paid it off from savings. And because nobody in that family ever questioned Lorraine's stories, the version where her son and daughter-in-law saved her house simply ceased to exist. For 3 years I said nothing. Garrett said nothing. What stays with me isn't the lien, or the lawyer's papers, or even the silence at that Thanksgiving table after I finally said the thing out loud. What stays with me is the parking lot, months later, when an old woman who'd never used my name asked me to grab her sweater and called me Margot, like she'd been doing it her whole life. That's where I understood how the whole thing actually worked. Nothing happened by accident. Every piece of how it ended was planted in how it began. I think about cause and consequence more than I ever did before. Lorraine spent 40 years pouring everything into the son who took and took, and when she fell on the ice, that son was always traveling. That wasn't bad luck. That was the harvest of what she'd planted. Spencer learned he could take a down payment, a boat slip, a whole house, and never once be asked to give anything back so. Of course he vanished the moment giving was required. None of it was random. People show you who they are in small moments, and those small moments add up into the person who does or doesn't sit beside you in a waiting room. If there's anything I'd want you to carry out of my story, it's this. The reason I could speak up at that table wasn't that I'm brave. It's that I'd spent 3 quiet years doing the decent thing when no one was watching, paying the bank, keeping my word, papering the loan correctly, even though it felt cold at the time. Doing right when it's invisible is what gives you something solid to stand on when the moment finally comes to be seen. That's the first thing. The second is that being right is cheap, but being smart about how you're right is rare. I didn't win that table by yelling. I won it because my accountant made me handle the loan the correct way, because I kept records, because I thought 3 steps ahead, even when I was hurting. Feelings are real, but they don't hold up at the county recorder's office. Clear thinking does. And the third is the hardest. Because it's the one nobody caps for. I had to keep showing up. I had to drive Lorraine to the cardiologist after she'd humiliated me. I had to sit in those ugly waiting rooms and fight her insurance company when every part of me wanted to let her sit there alone. That steadiness doing the next right thing on a Tuesday, when no one will ever thank you, is what slowly turned a woman of pure frost into someone who finally said my name. So if you take one thing, take this. Build the kind of character that shows in the dark. Think clearly when your heart is loud. And keep showing up long after it stops feeling fair. That's not how you win an argument. That's how you become someone no one can argue away.